Hey guys, welcome to People I Think Are Cool. I'm your host, Liz Reed, one part of the art duo Cuddles and Rage, and this is my podcast where we review cool, interesting, creative people. Today on the show, we have comic writer Steve Orlando. I met Steve a year ago when he was doing a signing at Third Eye Comics. I met him through my friend Clay McLeod Chapman, who was also doing a signing and was also on People I Think Are Cool. So all these worlds tying in together. Steve has done so much in comics. He's worked with basically every major publisher, big and small, and he was on staff at DC for a long time, and he's written Batman and Wonder Woman and so many other characters, and I feel like every popular comic universe you can think of. If you are a comic fan, you've probably read him. I wanted to have Steve on the show to talk about comics and writing and his experience, but also to talk about Loaded Bible, which is the, I guess, new series. Tim Seeley made Loaded Bible. I guess I have to look. I think it was in the early aughts, but I'll put the year down in the show notes and also for the video people on the screen. And now they are continuing that storyline, Tim and Steve. And Steve asked me to sculpt a diorama cover for an upcoming issue as a variant cover. So that was really exciting. I loved working with them, and I wanted to have him on the show to talk about Loaded Bible. And for those of you who aren't aware of the storyline, Loaded Bible is basically about a cloned Jesus. I'm roughing it here. Like, there's more to it than that. You know, they have cloned Jesus, and he is now hunting vampires and specifically going after Dracula. So if that doesn't pull you in, I don't know what else will. But I don't know if I've shared this. I'm going to show it again. This is one of the first of 6 variant covers. Well, they did 6 variant covers for the first issue, and this is one of them. I picked up this weekend at Third Eye Comics. Thank you. And I was going to say thank you, Steve, who also owns Third Eye Comics, but also, like, thank you all the Steves who have provided comics, Anderson and Orlando. So without further ado, guys, enjoy this awesome chat with the wonderful and talented Steve Orlando. I've had a really fun time doing research on you uh, and hearing out what everybody asks you, all the different questions and stuff. So there's some of the same olds that I'll try and avoid, but sorry, go ahead.
Well, if they are, I will gladly answer them, but I'll also be excited to have new ones. So hit me. But yeah, I mean, God love you for listening to this podcast. I tend to ramble, as you're probably aware. So like that you're doing God's work with that research.
Well, speaking of God, Steve, I wanted to talk to you about Jesus going into this interview.
Sure, absolutely.
So most recently, Loaded Bible just came out. And when I received your email to do a variant cover on it, it was actually a title that I hadn't heard of before. And so I went back and researched it and realized that you guys are kind of like reimagining that brand. So can you walk through like how you got started on working on Loaded Bible with Tim?
Sure. And, you know, the first thing is Tim will be quick to say it. Since he and I met in 2015, potentially the first day that we met, I said, oh man, we got to bring Loaded Bible back because I loved it when I was but a reader. Tim is a little older than me, not much. We won't betray him there. But he has been in comics since, you know, ink was invented. He was probably like came right out of the womb and started drawing comics. So I loved that it was just like very provocative. It was, I mean, subtle is not what I would call the original Loaded Bible. It was bold, provocative, and it was sort of like, well, I say gonzo a lot in the title copy, but yeah, I mean, it wore its themes on its sleeve. It wasn't afraid to get a reaction. And I loved that when I was younger. And to be frank, like it's something I thought I could do a great job with. So I have been lobbying Tim for this pretty much as long as folks have thought of me as being a comic writer, because we met at the DCYOU Summit in 2015, immediately got along. became good friends in real life, over the intervening years. But I was sticking on to Loaded Bible. And it turns out that Tim is also working with Studio Arancia on some stuff, who is our artistic partner on the book. And once I knew that, it all just fit into place. I was like, we need to work together on this. We need to bring it back. And now we live in a gonzo unsettled time. So to me, it was the right time for it to return. And I'm incredibly proud of it. We set out to make a book that felt like you had sort of discovered a book from the 90s or mid-aughts that you had never noticed at the time in the back of the quarter bin or something. Now the $4 bin, I suppose. But we wanted it to feel like a time capsule because that's where the book came from. And I'm incredibly proud of that. To me, it does feel like you have there's this early era extreme studios or type book that you didn't know existed, but there's a little more sort of depth to it, we hope. But it is it's a love letter to the things that I was reading when I was younger, updated for 2022 with a more modern progressive mindset. But at the same time, it looks and feels like the books that made me got me in the door with comics, and I'm very excited about that. And when it comes to covers, I love a bit of contrast. So yeah, of course, we're going to reach out to you guys. I try when I do originals. I always want to do, you want to do one or two covers that are the type of things people expect from comics. But then, this is an original book; it's creator owned. So why the fuck shouldn't we do something that is totally unexpected? So this is why. Yeah, you'll see the covers you would normally get usually on a book from me, which we're very excited to have Mirka and Dolfo handling and Giuseppe Cafaro, the interior artist, handling. But then it's I was just give me 8 covers. I want to do stuff that is totally unexpected. And maybe mainstream readers won't necessarily get it, but maybe they will, and maybe they'll see something they've never seen before. So when I came across your work, if I remember correctly, we met via Clay. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was
Clay.
at Third Eye Comics when you were doing a signing.
Well, I knew it was there, but then I realized I was sitting there with 3 people. So I had.
Oh yeah, no, it was Clay. Yeah.
I had a 25% chance of remembering what the actual through line was, but I saw what you folks do, and it's awesome, and it's different, and that's what I want out of my original covers. I want to be I want people to see stuff, art styles on these covers they've never seen before, and what you guys do is so cool. So to be able to come together on it, really, really exciting. And like I said, maybe not all of them are hits in the direct market, but I need these things for my soul. We need to push the art form out in a lot of different ways. That's why we have your diorama work. That's why we have a screen printed cover. That's why we have photographic covers. We have one that's like an ode to the Shroud of Turin. We have a burlesque cover, which I've never done before, with my friend Lauren. And there's going to be a lot more. I want to push the envelope. Because it's, the worst that happens is you get a cover that maybe a few folks don't get, but maybe people see something in that cover they've never seen before in a comic store. And to me, that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it inspires creativity to see all the different mediums, and the burlesque one really stood out to me as one that was super cool. I think if that's one of the 8 or 6 variants that came out with the first issue, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. And Lauren is an amazing artist. We were very happy on my last book. We featured her husband, who's the AEW wrestler Danhausen. And then when we came back with the Loaded Bible, I was like, oh my God, vampire and religious iconography. We have to bring Lauren in, Lulu, La Duchess Derriere, professionally, to work on this. It was just like a hole in one, or a home run, or whatever sports analogy you want. And she crushed it. I had no question she would. She's an amazing artist.
Yeah. When you're working on something like Loaded Bible, how much background and religion did you really need to pull from it? Because, as somebody I grew up in Texas, and I went to school in the Bible Belt, but I had no religious background. When I went to a private Baptist school, I had to buy the Cliff Notes for the Bible when I took New Testament, Old Testament, because I was I don't know what's going on here. So I can only imagine the knowledge that you had to bring in writing something like this.
Well, the thing is my religious background is somewhat eclectic, shall we say? Let's wind it out, right? I'm half Jewish on my mother's side, which by that dogma would say that I'm all Jewish. and in an ethnic sense would certainly mean that I am all Jewish. But I'm also confirmed Catholic from my father's side, which in Catholic dogma would generally say that I'm all Catholic. Obviously I'm a queer man, so that comes into play as well. But that being said, I kind of smelled. I smelled whatever. I smelled bullshit from a very early age. When you have and believe it or not, that isn't even meant to be disrespectful. But when you have sort of a mixed background, a lot of these things that are taken as given aren't. I was like really, really for a while. I mean, I remember waking up when I was like 7 and crying to my mother because I told a lie and thought I was going to hell. And then as I became older, I like to say that all confirmation did for me is confirmed that I was done with Catholicism. Because, my priest was a nice man, but like a raving alcoholic, barely gave a shit about rehearsing confirmation. And beyond that, I already sort of smelled the inconsistencies, the sort of absolutism that is at least part of Catholicism. Like, well, we're right. And they never sort of skirt around the fact, well, what about all my friends who think about different things? Are they all wrong? Like, they probably think they're right too. Going on to the fact that, I would be going to the gym in high school. And I distinctly remember I was in the parking lot of a Bally's Total Fitness, which I don't even know if they exist anymore. And a guy came up to me, he'd seen me in the gym, and he gave me a little book of Bible quotes. And he said, have you ever thought about the fact you're going to hell? And I was like, no, not really. And it was because I at least somewhat obviously looked Jewish. So he saw me in public, saw that I was a Jew, and decided just to save my soul. But I was still not totally done with mainstream religion. So I didn't know what to do with this book of Bible quotes, right? Like so I drove right to my church and I went to the priest there and I was like, well, what do I do with this? And he was like, oh, well, we have something that we do for things like that. And then he just threw it in the trash. Because, it was clearly given in hate. So there was a lot of mixed messages, to say the least. But I also just, the thing is, in the core of this book that I think comes through is that it's not necessarily, like, it's no secret that I'm against organized religion, but I'm not necessarily against, or not even necessarily, I'm not against faith, because even before I left all that stuff, it's very obvious to me that the actions of mainstream religious dogma certainly go against the core base tenets that I was being taught in Sunday school. How can I have this mother telling me that all you really have to know is love yourself and love your neighbor? And then we go out there and that's anything but, it's, well, this person is, well, this is a sin and this is a sin and that person's going to hell. And your mom's going to hell, by the way, because because she's not Catholic. And it was just all a bunch of horseshit to me. But the core tenets of the person were not, even as a queer man, I don't think that if, as is evident by this book, I don't think if Jesus showed up today, he would be against me. I think it's very clear that he would be like, oh, you guys, what is it, like all of this judgment, all of this hate, like you're missing the entire point. And that's what I hope comes through with the book. Like, I expected some wild responses, but it's not an anti-Jesus or anti-spirituality book. It sure is an anti-hypocrisy book and an anti-hate book and things like that. But that's summed up to me in the first issue where he says, oh man, like, they cloned me, but they cloned me too well. I immediately saw, that this is all nonsense. This is not what I was about. So it's always been complicated for me, but I think when you have that disconnect early on, right? Like my mother would go to church with my father as a form of support, but she's proud to be a Jewish woman. She didn't partake in any of the ceremony. She didn't kneel. She had quite literally just sat there next to him because it was something that was important to him. So there's probably not a time when I was asking why that was from as long as I can remember. So there's never been like sort of one monolith for me. And maybe that made it easier for me to call out the hypocrisy of something that's supposed to be about love and acceptance and forgiveness. But in practice, when you put it in the hands of people these days, is rarely about that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I looked at the art style between the original loaded Bible and then what would you call this one? Is it like, it's kind of its own thing separate from it, right? Or like a
Hey,
reboot?
hey, listen, sequels 20 years after the fact are very popular right now.
Yes.
Um, so, we're saying that it's a relaunch. It's not a reboot because
Relaunch. Okay.
everything that happened in the previous things happened. My dream is that we can do this as book 2, and then do an even crazier sort of bonkers comic book epic with a hypothetical book 3, and then collect them all, and you will just get boom, boom, boom. You'll get it all in one spot. Like, this book certainly ends on what can be a very hopeful cliffhanger, but there's certainly more to tell at the end. It's not going to be unsatisfying though. Like, you'll know what's happening, but what's happening is a pretty wild thing by the end of the of issue 6.
Right. That's like the sweetest ending. So between, 20 years between, Jesus got like really buff. So, like, how did you decide to like meet him up like an 80s action star?
Well, it's a book by me. It's got to have alluring people in it. But he's been living rough in the desert.
Very
So
hydrated then, I guess, with wine.
yeah. Well, you see, they're eating mutated fruit, as you saw in issue 1. So it's a high protein cactus that they're eating. That's what I like to say. But I'm actually like, look, it's an over the top book. A lot of my original work tends to be because, well, as I said, we don't live in a moment of subtlety. But it's funny to me because a lot of the time writing him, it reminded me of a lot of stuff that was on, was going through my mind when I was writing Wonder Woman. Like radical. The thing is that like the best Diana stories are about radical love and radical compassion. And those things are always going to unnerve people. And I don't think there's a lot of air between that doctrine and the doctrine that you have of clone Jesus in this book. And honestly, those two phrases certainly align with the original person who was a zealot and got put to death. Were he to be a real person, and he may have been. I'm just saying, like, we don't really know for sure. It was 2,000 years ago. But that being said, like I've already written a character for whom, love and compassion come first. Of course, she's from an Amazon island, but it actually felt sort of like slipping into an old comfortable suit in some ways coming over here, because I've thought a lot about what that means. And we knew it on Diana, and we know it here. That's not going to always please people. And it's not even going to please the people around them in story, because as humans, we tend to want vengeance over justice and things like that. And Diana is going to show as much love for her enemies as she does for her friends, and that's not always something we want to hear. Now, clone Jesus, as Tim wrote him, wasn't quite that far. Like, he's pretty gleefully enjoying chopping up vampires, but I do think that he is still pretty close to Diana's form of radical love and compassion, and that's always going to be subversive. It's always going to be provocative. It was 20 years ago, and it is even more so now, when we can't even be bothered to like put a piece of cloth over our face as an inconvenience to help another person. So I think it's more radical than ever before.
Yeah, no, that makes a great point. One thing that is so interesting about a lot of the comics that you have worked on is that it's so much a team effort, but a lot, just outside of like the artist side of it, but also like with this, Tim's name on it is still on it. And so did you guys work together with writing, the script essentially?
Oh yeah, no, Tim and I talk all the time about the book. I have done a little more of the actual implementation of it because he's a very busy man who is also teaching a college class. But it's not even the first time we've done that, because we're used to collaborating on stuff at DC actually. So it's very similar to that. The whole book is worked out together. I maybe have, just due to my schedule, done a little more of the nuts and bolts, but he sees everything and approves everything, and the outline and everything that happens comes from both of us, which is again not dissimilar to how we did Batman and Robin Eternal, where we, as in this case, as a fuller writer's room, broke out all 38 weeks of story, and then the individual issues were divvied up between people in the room. So it's kind of a similar style to what we did there. And it makes sense. Tim and I became friends over working on Batman and Robin Eternal. So none of it surprises me that we're back doing co-writing again.
When you got into comics, were you expecting to co-write as much as you do, or as little as you do? Like, I mean, it seems like you kind of go back and forth between doing either.
Well, I wasn't, but what I learned is, it's a way to, like, build new bridges and strengthen my bonds with people whose work I respect and who obviously like as friends and collaborators. But it's also very common for folks that are coming up or looking for new gigs to sort of ask for an email intro and things like that. And especially in the age of needing to sort of strengthen and platform new voices. Honestly, I have been learning about, when I got into comics, I've been learning about the industry since I was 12 years old, almost 20 years of learning the ropes. And I learned as time went on that, an email intro sometimes isn't enough. It's kind of like dropping someone in the deep end. And if I work on a book with someone, we both win. We get to collaborate. We get to create something that would be better than we would create on our own, certainly. But at the same time, also, I'm not just hurling someone at publishers and saying, take it on faith that this person is reliable and professional, all these things. We're ensuring that the first impression is a good one. So that hopefully then they can continue to climb. These folks don't need me. They never did. But perception and first impressions are a big thing, like in any job. So now, when I work with people, obviously, I benefit too. We get a new book that I love. But in addition to that, I'm not just shoving someone onto the dance floor. I'm helping them learn the steps, and then they don't need me anymore, or at least they're better positioned to keep climbing themselves.
Yeah, I love how you kind of pay it forward with that kind of mentorship-ish like relationship with people. Especially, I'm just amazed like hearing you talk about finding a mentor at 12 years old. I feel like that's the hardest part for people getting into any industry that they want to get into, is like really finding mentors who they connect with and who will, actually guide them through it, versus what you're saying, like just lop them on an email and be like, you're off, make me look good if you can.
Well, or to be honest, or reflect badly on me. Like, again, I'm not a saint here. Everybody wins. But I was mentored by Steve Siegel and Joe Kelly, who are now part of Man of Action Studios. Folks would know that mostly because they created Ben 10 at Cartoon Network. They were in comics when I met them. But yeah, look, Siegel, I try to be someone in the business side of comics that always does exactly what I say. And that, because that's how he was with me. We met when I was 12. He was never one to mince words. I like to describe him as lovingly brusque. I gave him my terrible script that I'd written. And he was like, okay, well, here's a couple things that you could do to make it better. I will see you at this show next year with a new script that's improved, or you'll quit and I won't. And I hope I see you. And apparently he says that to a lot of people, but the difference is he said that to me for 18 years and I kept coming back. And along that period, yes, I got closer to being ready. He said, you know what, when you have something that's publishable, I will put it in the hands of a publisher and you'll be ready to go. And much like that, when I did come 2012, pardon me, he said, he looked at the pitch that I had, San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con. Would that be right? Yes, New York Comic-Con of that year. And he said, okay, this is ready to go. Where do you want to put it? And I said, oh, well, I'd love to work at Image, obviously. And he handed it to the person next to him, who was Eric Stevenson. And after 20 years or 18, 20 years, the approval process took about 5 seconds. So very exciting. But the point is, he did, he did what he said he would do, and also didn't sort of mince words about what that. It wasn't, an entitlement. I spent more at that point, longer trying to break into comics than I had spent not trying to break into comics, because I was almost 30 and I started at 12. And so that goes for this stuff too. When people ask if I'll recommend them, for a gig or something, to be frank, if they don't have any published credits or anything, I don't think, of course, not everybody wants to hear that, but I said, well, in a nice way, I said, well, that's not really going to help. Like, why don't we do something together so you sort of learn how to do this? And then, of course, you can, fly away as a beautiful swan. But it's not, it's not fair to someone who's never been in the trenches to just throw them into the trenches, especially when you don't really know what the trenches are until you've been there. So I think it's obviously can reflect poorly on me if I just say, oh, Tom Tucker is the person for this job, and then they totally bone it. But it can also, that's not fair to them because we didn't set them up for success. So yeah, like to me, I've really enjoyed it because it's a chance for me to take acquaintances and turn them into friends and get to know them better professionally and personally. We both get a book out at the end that is making people happy, hopefully, and is saying something, again, more complex and better told than either of us would tell on our own. And then, yes, they can become a swan and keep climbing without me, and I'll be off doing my own thing. And that's the most exciting thing for me. I did have someone who was relentlessly patient with me. And important to note that I was also willing to accept criticism and not sort of turn an uninterested ear towards it. But I had that. So if I can, as you said, pay that forward in a way that to me, I've learned is at least the most helpful, then that's a great moment.
That is so generous. And I feel like that's the best way to get, like karma, to get goodness coming back to you is helping others. And absolutely the point about criticism is so important. I think that that's why so many people, like before they even come to you, like have to be actively writing and showing their work to people, because then you can really build up the thick skin for criticism and you almost crave it when you don't get it.
Well, and I'm not, you need to find it from people who have your best interest at heart, because it's easy to be cruel, and I try not to be. But at the same time, I would I would be a rich man if I had a quarter for every person that came up to me at a con and said, "Oh, well, I have this spec comic script. How can I get it published?" And I, unfortunately, I have to tell them that 99% of the time, you must find an artist to work with, and and editors, especially at Marvel and DC, either won't. Again, 99% of the time and 100% of the time shouldn't, for legal reasons, look at spec scripts. And they say, okay, well, it's great. I'm going to get it. I'm going to sell it anyway. Okay. But you won't, because I'm not like pulling these ideas out of my ass. And those folks are not ready to really listen. They just want to be told that what they're doing is the right path. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And it's unfortunate when folks, don't want to be helped, because
that's a good way to put it.
because it might mean changing what they've decided is the way in. But look, I thought I would break in at Marvel and DC with no published work when I was 12, and I was wrong. But sometimes it happens. It is true that everybody does have a different story of how they got in. So all I can do is play the odds and talk about what is most likely to work. Because there's that 1% of people who have a spec script and they'll just catch an editor in the right moment and they'll get a look. It'll get them in, or they'll give it to a writer who will then ombudsman them in. But I can only talk about what is overall most likely to be the best path. And maybe that person, maybe a few of those people that have said, no, this is the way I'm going to do it, ended up doing it. If so, that's great. I'm not going to be like, fuck you, I told you it wouldn't work. But
even though you might want to in some cases.
Well, but I can say what is most likely to work. I think about, I have someone in my family who's younger and still in that sort of he's still, at the time he was still a teenager. He said, looking for a path. And, my job as his older cousin is to just support him however he wants, but also not to bullshit him. And, I remember there's a period where he was trying to get into fashion, but he didn't want to go to college. Didn't want to do AutoCAD, didn't want to do any type of college. He was like, oh, well, can I still get into fashion? I was like, yeah, you can. Is it going to be exceptionally harder? Yeah, but can you? Sure. Are we gonna, if you want, will we go to every local fashion show and design event so you can start networking? Sure. But is that the path that is going to make it easiest for you to get in there? No.
Mm.
And he's a very successful jeweler now who didn't get into fashion. So I guess that proves that.
Yeah. Well, going to school, you get that built-in network. It just seems like a lot of people, like, they come up together, from their grading classes in fashion.
Oh, I mean, listen, my degree's in Russian language and culture, which is a real hot button one in the past couple of months.
Yeah.
But the real value of me going to my yuppie liberal arts school has, as you said, has been the connections.
Yeah.
And in my case, the support. Because I wrote and illustrated and lettered and all that shit, produced a graphic novel as one of my theses in college. And trust me, there are no copies out there.
I know, I wanted to see one. Like, I want to see your art style.
No, it's like The Ring. If you look at it, you die. But I do, I could do that because they had a program available to do something like that and to be independently directed. And, what I gained from that, I would never have been able to spend 8 months doing that like I did in college. And if I didn't do that, maybe I would have gotten into comics, but I wouldn't know exactly what every single part of making a comic is like. I wouldn't have that empathy. I wouldn't write for artists the way I do. So there's a lot of like ripple effects that you get from that incubator that I don't think necessarily just show up in your degree or something like that, right? It's all the side effects, so to speak, that I think are really beneficial. Because clearly I am not writing a treatise on Russian superstitions right now, but I sure could, although it would probably be somewhat out of date because I haven't lived there in a long time.
Yeah. Well, we're winding down to time, but I have two questions that I'd really like to get to if you have a few more minutes. Are you good?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So in one interview, you talked about writing a middle grade fantasy novel, and I'm assuming is that prose and not like a graphic novel?
No, it actually is. You're probably talking about Rainbow Bridge, which I launched last year with my friend Steve Fox, and that was the launch of Aftershock Comics' Seismic Press line, which was their middle grade and YA line. Since Steve and I, in August of last year, had the first book out, which was Rainbow Bridge. It was about getting to have one last adventure with your pet after they pass on. And we're very, very proud of that. But that actually is a graphic novel, or at least a comic book story. And it's a good example of the benefits of co-writing, because anyone who's read at least the work that I did that people like, it's generally very full of sex, very full of violence. The language is aggressive. And you know what? Nothing about that screams middle grade, but I sure do know how to build a world and a story and a dramatic conceit. So when we start talking about Rainbow Bridge, I knew I had to bring in my friend Steve Fox, because before he got into freelance editing, he was a YA and middle grade editor at Random House. So this was just like, two great tastes that taste great together, that really are like the perfect alchemy for this book. Could he have written Rainbow Bridge by himself? Sure. I don't know if it would have had the new, the sort of sauciness that I bring to the table, but could I have written it without him? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I know that because I have one other YA book called The Kitchen Witch, which I love. But it turns out that there are some elements of it that, at least for the very, very sort of dogmatic YA readers, break unspoken rules. Like there's kids that have magic blunderbusses, for example. And I guess some publishers don't even want to see like teens using essentially magic ray guns, or things like that.
Wow.
Well, we're talking like circa 2016 is the last time I showed this around, because I also then landed it at 215 Inc. and it's available now. And I'm still very proud of it. But I think that it would have been, had I known Fox at the time, as well as I do now, he certainly would have been an asset to sort of, again, just like pivot the targeting of the contents of this right in the strike zone. And that's what happened with Rainbow Bridge. But long story short, it is a comic. gorgeously illustrated by Valentina Brancati. It is basically a Disney animated film. After today, let's say a DreamWorks animated film. Disney's taking a beating today. So it's like your favorite non-Disney animated film on the page.
Interesting. Okay. Would you ever write, or have you ever written like a traditional novel?
I would like to. It would be an exciting challenge, and challenge is the key word. Like I have a lot of prose fragments, but when I showed it to my book market agent, he just sort of sweated a little bit. I think I may be a little too over descriptive. But it would be an exciting challenge and a new talent to learn, because really when you're writing a comic script, you're not even having a conversation with your reader. You're having a conversation with the artist you're working with. So I would have a lot to learn with prose, and happy to say that. You know, I'm sure some people like come around and just think that they're comics Jesus, no pun intended, and can step into any other format. I would have a lot to learn, but it would be exciting. It would be exciting to do so.
Yeah, I liked reading your draft for Loaded Bible, because like when I write, for our graphic novels, I'm just writing to myself or to my husband, who's my partner, but I'm doing all the art. So it's like not as descriptive, but I love reading other comic writers and just how descriptive they are and how enthusiastic, and how it is more conversational. It's not like this formal script where, a good amount of people are going to read it, but it can be as casual as you want it to be.
Well, and it's funny because Loaded Bible is drawn by, it's worked through a studio Arancia, and a lot of the artists they work with are Italian. And I've actually had to adjust my style to actually usually say less, because I've learned that the more idioms you use and the more you write, the more it can be misinterpreted by the translator. And you will wind up with some wild shit. I
never thought about the language barriers. Wow. Okay.
This wasn't in my book. This was in someone else's book, but I was just talking to a peer who is English. And he wrote, in this book, he wrote that one of the characters gives the other one a raspberry. And as you can predict, when they got the art back, it was literally this character giving a piece of fruit to another character. And that's happened to me too. I wrote a book where someone they were like an evil version of the Flash. So they were getting followed by lightning like the Flash does, but the lightning was black. And I was like, oh, they're like black lightning is like streaking behind them. And when we got the art back, it sure had Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, chasing this person. The superhero, that is. And
what do you do with that?
I mean, luckily she works digitally through that book, so we just were like, "Is it possible that you misinterpreted this or interpreted this?" And she was happy to fix it. But it was funny because also, as sometimes we're working so far ahead, I got this page and I was like, "Did I put fucking Black Lightning in this page? Like, did it?" It had been like 5 months, and I was like, my memory is pretty good. This seems like a bit of a non sequitur. But maybe I did just put like she's fighting whatever, your favorite superhero is or something, because it was a flashback shot. But no, sure enough, it was, as I said, it was Black Lightning Gate. And, that is how I've learned that when working with folks for whom English is not the first language, which is, not a problem at all. The onus is on me to be as clear as possible. And not necessarily as evocative as I might be sometimes. And that's a good testament to the fact that, this is a conversation with your creative team, not just your line artist. And sometimes when you're speaking to folks who don't come from the same native language, your conversation is a little bit simpler. And that was something, that would happen in real life. And certainly I learned about in comic pages that has played out. Oh, man. We've been, knock on wood, very lucky in Loaded Bible, but I'm sure there's going to be Giuseppe's going to surprise me somehow, and there's just going to be like a Care Bear in the background. God knows. God help the person that from another language where I just say that someone walks into a bear bar, and it's just.
Please do that. Okay, last question for you.
Stay tuned.
I know I know that you're a huge wrestling fan, and I'm actually a huge fan of wrestling documentaries. I don't actually watch the matches, but I just think wrestling is such a soap opera, and the guys and gals are so crazy that like every documentary on wrestling is like the best documentary ever. So I was wondering if you have a particular favorite wrestling documentary.
Oh man, it's hard because the thing about wrestlers are the businesses that it's kind of a lot and perhaps not to blow up your spot on these, but like people are still working on those documentaries, so it is like there are a lot that I like, but it's not as though folks don't know that they are being filmed and like they're still sort of putting themselves over.
It's
So
like
like,
reality TV kind of.
oh absolutely, so they're
Yeah.
hyper real, but that said, special shout out to, oh man, I'm trying to think of one that is not sad. I mean, a good
They're all
example is Dark Side
sad.
of the, I love Dark Side of the Ring. But Dark Side of the Ring, those guys, some of those guys are clearly still working. If you think about
Mm-hmm.
like the plane ride from hell episode, like of course Scorpio Sky is going to say that he beat up like 5 guys, because he's still putting himself over.
Mm.
But that being said, I do like the madness of the New Jack episode.
Oh, I think
Uh,
I'm on the episode right now. That's the episode I'm on. Yeah, I'm like, ooh,
on
this is
an
spicy.
episode in which he just casually talks about trying to murder one person and maybe two. Um, yeah, no, it is wild the things that he says just offhand. Yeah, so I do really enjoy that. Um, oh, another great episode of that is the one about Collision in Korea,
Okay.
which is a truly wild wrestling event. To this day, is one of if not the highest attended wrestling events in history. Of course, this is because it was in Korea and attendance was mandatory. Um, which is a thing that they note there in the thing. There's no footage of
Huh.
it because again, Korea, but it's a
Yeah.
wild thing that happened in North Korea. It's a wild thing that happened in the 90s where a bunch of WCW wrestlers just flew across the world for a couple days and put on a wrestling show that, yeah, I think had something like 900,000 people.
Wow.
But they were effectively, told to go at gunpoint. So it's very surreal. Some of the guys almost get renditioned. But again, so they say, like if ask Shawn Michaels how many people it took to beat him up in Syracuse in the 90s, and I'm sure the number gets bigger all the time.
Yeah.
But so I do love those. There's a special reverence for Beyond the Mat just because it was like the first, and I think that much like reality TV, I think there's a lot more reality there because people didn't really know what it was at the time.
Yeah.
Now we're like in the post-reality reality TV generation. I just got done watching Drag Race versus the UK versus the world finale before I got on here. And, you can tell like the people know the beats. They've even prepared their sad story for the finale, and it's hyper real. It's not real. But I think Beyond the Mat, you got, pardon me, like the footage of Foley and his kids crying as the Rock is hitting him, and Terry Funk, who
Mm-hmm.
basically even in the 90s already didn't have knees. Like I think that is very real and moving in a way that you don't really get in the current era, because whether it's wrestling documentary or any type of reality TV, again, like we're watching kids who have grown up on reality, or people, not kids anymore, who have grown up on reality TV as if it were scripted narrative. And sometimes you get real, sometimes you get folks who know they have to play a part. Like, am I the
Mm-hmm.
villain? like,
Right.
like,
Right.
so it's an interesting thing, but I will say, God love you. The New Jack episode is a wild one. Collision in Korea is a wild one. Um, some are extremely, extremely sad, and I can't say I enjoyed them. I mean, obviously the Benoit one is very sad.
Oh, I just finished. That was
The
so sad.
the Owen one is very sad. And Owen, by the way, I watched that live when I was a child. Not that anyone could have known at the time.
Is that the one where does he die on live TV
Yeah,
or
on
okay?
like,
Because somebody made a comic out of that. So
well, they cut away, but yeah, he has a harness malfunction and falls like something like 100 feet from the rafters, and you see that. I mean, you don't now, but again, they didn't know it was going to happen live. But he didn't actually die on live TV, but he did die pretty soon after, and it's extremely sad, and it was preventable, and you know, it's devastating. And obviously, Vince McMahon is a giant piece of shit. I'm happy to say that. He's never going to care what I say. But I mean, like the more you watch the documentaries, it's just clear how he mistreats people, especially like things with Owen's wife or widow and things like that. So, but that's the thing. Like, at least Collision in Korea is just bonkers. And the
that's
New
your
Jack one,
the light one.
well, and the New Jack one, like nobody actually dies. So it's more just like your eyes are bugging out because he's just like, yeah, this guy dropped me off some scaffolding, gave me brain damage. My brain was coming out of my nose. So about 10 years later, we were working a match and I just threw him off the scaffolding and I was trying to kill him.
Cool.
And, and you're just like, there's a couple of those, he's wrestling this old guy and he's like, oh, he started trying to shoot on me in the ring, which means just hit him for real. He's like, yeah, so I had a shank and I just started stabbing him. And he's like,
I just saw that. I think I'm at that part. Wow. Or they showed a preview of that. Ugh.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's that. There's the mass transit incident, which is infamous. That's also in the New Jack one. A kid who lied about his age, said he wanted to get color, which is bleed in wrestling terminology. And they paired him with New Jack, and New Jack cut him way too deep because it was his first time, and he straight up almost died.
Ooh, that's like David Arquette in that incident.
Well, but Arquette is, yeah. I mean, well, the Nick Gage one is another one. Although, again, I would say that you're probably getting like 10% of what Nick is saying about himself is a work. Like he's still trying to make himself seem. Because the funny thing is that everyone not that I should be blowing up his spot, he'll kill me. But most people I know that have worked with him said that he's actually incredibly nice. And, but what he does is what he does. And I think you actually see that in the Arquette thing, which is fascinating, right? Like I have no problem believing that they had, a normal lunch and he was like, okay, I'm going to this is when I'm going to smash a light tube over your head. And then I'm going to and you probably don't want to do this. And in the Arquette one, you can see David's like, oh, I definitely want to do this. And then he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And of course, of course it was horrifying. He said, you shouldn't do it. And I would never let someone just, voluntarily cut me open.
Yeah.
So the Arquette one is wild because he made an informed decision, but didn't know what he was being informed about. It seemed to me.
Yeah, no, totally.
But I mean, Gage, look, I mean, that dude, he's probably over for life for going to prison for robbing a bank without a mask on, and that's even before the deathmatch stuff. There's a wild time. I love the entire industry. I love how folks still cling to certain aspects about it. And you see that in the documentaries. I love, I think it's in the Plane Ride from Hell episode as well. Mike Chioda's on there. And, they're talking about how Scott Hall almost died, I think, from drinking on the plane. But it's Chioda, and they're just like, I saw Scott, but I was like, he's fine. He'll kick out. It's always, you're having a life-threatening complication. It's like, oh, he'll kick out. It's a fascinating mindset and something I have the utmost respect for, because to be clear, I could never do it. There's not enough money in the world to get me to throw myself around on a wood mat and take a normal bump. We're not even talking about deathmatch stuff and things like that. So clearly I have a lot of opinions about it, but yes, when you get to the Korea one, A+.
Yeah. Oh, I love how passionate you are. You just light up when you talk about wrestling.
Well, there are a few forms, I think, of truly yeoman-like entertainment anymore. And to an extent, I think comics is one of them. Not now that they're expensive, but it started as that back in the day. They were 5 cents, and comics are backed by the mob in the 30s. And, that's true. And and now you have things where like, glitzy, like TV wrestling is one thing, but when you go to an indie show, like it really is like, it's all types of folks coming together in like, just like very down to earth venues, like the one that I go to here in Boston is at the White Eagle. There's some free advertising. It's a Polish cultural home in Worcester. It's like, yeah, you can go in this place with hardwood floors that is probably also a banquet hall, and they set up a ring. There's a bar that you can get some scotch and a solo cup in, and you know what? And folks they come out. There's no big stage. They come out of a tiny curtain and they just beat the shit out of each other. And it's very like, it makes me sound like a douchebag to say like salt of the earth. That's why I say yeoman like, but it is not highbrow entertainment, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think drag is very similar, by the way. Like it's an art form that came from a community that just had to create and had to perform. And it's not always, and of course, yes, now there is a glitzy version, but it doesn't always have to be. Sometimes it's lo-fi, often it's lo-fi, and it's people who just need to perform. They need to express themselves. And especially indie wrestling, I think, is a lot like that. I mean, these are people who are throwing themselves around a ring for like, sometimes like $25 a night, and they're doing that because they love it. And who the fuck am I? Why am I excited about it? Because that's passion you can't deny.
Yeah, exactly. So much heart.
And that's my spiel about wrestling.
So. I don't want to keep you any longer. So tell us the real Steve Orlando social media links, how to find you, because we know there's the other guy.
There's a couple Steve Orlandos, but I'm the Steve Orlando. So that's where you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My Facebook, I tend to keep for my old personal existence before comics. So please seek me out on Twitter and Instagram. Easy to find there. Again, at the Steve Orlando. And God, as you said, there's a couple Steve Orlandos, but one is a very patient video game programmer that's been getting my emails since 2014, and we love him. We hope he's doing well. We met once at New York Comic Con, and all was right with the world when we touched fingers. It was a beautiful moment. But yes,
I want to get your signature on a comic and then his signature as well, since he's almost put just as much work forwarding your emails to you.
Well, there's a spokesman for University of Florida with my name as well, but I don't know if we like him. Pardon me, I couldn't tell you, but no creator ever term searches themselves. No one's ever done such a thing, but were they to, they would find out sometimes that there are people like a spokesman for University of Florida that share their name.
Ah, yes. Yeah, that's always unfortunate. That's like the one time the girl from my high school decided to become a porn star and decided to use another girl's name from our high school as her stage porn name. And that didn't go well.
But that's amazing revenge. Are you kidding me? Like
she got sued. But
I'm gonna start an OnlyFans, and I'm gonna use the name Philip Kennedy Johnson.
You do that.
You'd be like, I thought you would be taller. Well, this is what you get, folks.
Steve, I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for your time.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much to Steve for being on the show. I will have on the screen for the video portion where you can follow Steve, and also in the show notes where you can follow Steve and all his fun links. Go pick up his comics, check out his work, get inspired by his workouts. I feel like when I see Steve post to Instagram, I'm like, I need to get out there and start running. I need to keep up pace with Steve and staying healthy. He's very impressive. Okay, so since Steve and I talked about wrestling and wrestling documentaries, I wanted to get into, and because I've always been doing documentaries, I wanted to give you a different flavor of wrestling. It is I'm going to look it up here because I have it in front of me and I want to do it proper. I watched it when it came out in 2019. Nope. The movie that I'm tying in with Steve's interview today is Fighting with My Family. It was written by Stephen Merchant and directed by Stephen Merchant. It has a wonderful cast with Florence Pugh and Nick Frost. And it is a story about wrestling. It's based on the 2012 documentary The Wrestlers Fighting with My Family by Max Fisher, which I actually haven't seen, so I should check that out. But it's basically about a girl who grows up in a wrestling family and, goes into wrestling on her own. That's a really bad description, but it's a really fun, sweet, heartwarming movie. Even if you don't dig wrestling, this is still a wonderful watch because it's funny, and Florence, of course, is always giving an amazing performance, but I really didn't recognize her in this role. It wasn't until I looked it back up again, I was like, oh yeah, that was her. And it's weird because she's just everywhere now, but I feel like at that time, it's so weird to think that even in 2019, I just didn't make that connection, because if I saw her today, I would instantly know that it was her. But this is just a warm movie about family, and also I love the fact that it follows a woman going into this pretty male dominated field, and you will get cameos from some of your favorite wrestlers. So if you are a mega wrestling fan, then you will realize that. But yeah, go check it out. If it is streaming somewhere, then I'll have that in the show notes. So until next time, guys, I hope you stay cool. Wait, I'm doing that wrong. Until next time, keep creating, stay motivated, and stay cool.